If we look outside, you would see once again that it is snowing. But surely that's to be expected because, after all, it is January. But significantly, it also happens to be January the 18th, and that's a particular date that I shall never forget. Because on January the 18th, 1945, that was the day that I had to put aside all my teenage dreams and ambitions and aspirations and seek to become a young man who, for the first time in his life, was having to leave the comfort and security of his home and family. And I had to travel to the far extremes of the north of Scotland in order to be trained as a soldier. And this, undoubtedly, is a particular chapter in my life that I'd like to tell you about. The army barracks were situated within the 18th century fortress and were extremely bleak and uninviting, jutting out from the Moray Firth and into the cold North Sea. When I think back to this occasion, I'm sure that my mum would have been hiding her own tears while packing my case. And I think my own nervousness was masking her sadness and fears, having to part with the son that she had reared, loved, and nursed for the past 18 years. Whilst my father, who, having personally endured the destruction of Dunkirk, would no doubt perhaps be secretly praying that his son would not have to endure the same experience. On the evening of my intended journey up to Fort George, I was first accompanied by my parents from South Shields railway station up to Newcastle Central, whereupon we said our final goodbyes and farewells. And I joined the train that would take me from Newcastle across to Carlisle. And of course at Carlisle, I had to change trains for the connection up to Inverness, Scotland. And there were a lot of young men there waiting on the platform to join this particular train, which I believe was a troop train that had started from Liverpool area and collecting people on the way up. We were crammed onto the train, and it would be about midnight this time. And we're all strangers to each other and all very, very tired. So we had very little to say to each other except to curl up and try to get some sleep for the journey ahead. I do recall, though, from waking up in the morning when dawn broke and we were able to see the landscape through the windows of the train, I was quite taken aback, I must tell you. I'd never been to Scotland before, ever, to see what I call the rolling mountainous hills, bleak area, snow-swept, sleet. Not a soul in sight, not an animal, not a person. So bleak and uninspiring and uninviting. And I've never, ever, I think because of that shot, I've ever found any pleasure in going to Scotland or looking at the Scottish landscape. Very unimpressive. I always say it was only fit for goats, not for people. But nevertheless, when we arrived at Inverness, we subsequently had to join or transfer to the local village train that would take us from Inverness to a village called Ardesea, which was about 11 miles, I think, 10 or 11 miles from Inverness itself. And of course, Ardusir, being a village station, couldn't accommodate all the young men that were there, about 100 of us altogether. And the transport, which was to take us from Ardusir to the fort, hadn't turned up due to bad weather. So we were ushered from the platform to the rear of the station into the rolling sheds, or the repair sheds of the locos and trucks, etc., which did in fact give us some shelter from the falling snow, but it gave no shelter from the howling winds that were blowing through the eaves of the sheds, making it very, very cold, very depressed indeed. And we were stuck there for about an hour until the transport eventually arrived. And of course, when it did arrive, we were loaded onto the coaches and the trucks and taken down to the fort, which was about a 4 or 5 mile journey from the station. And I do recall when the fort came into view, to me, it was like a prison, a big stone-walled fortress. It was 200 years old, had a drawbridge and a moat. And I remember disembarking from the buses and being marched across the drawbridge into the entrance of the Fort George, where we were ushered into the so-called kitchen area and fed some sandwiches and hot tea in order to warm us up, and subsequently allocated to our rooms.
Now listen to me, you honourable little men. You do as you're told and work with a will, then help me all you can by doing what I say. And the Lord will prosper the work of your hands. But work against me, do me down, or play me up, I'll make your life a walking hell.
There was about 10 to 12 beds per room, a very uninspiring place, walls about 3 foot thick, cold and uninviting. And I do remember myself getting into bed, not a very comfortable bed at that, but getting into bed, a cold bed, first time from home, having very disturbed sleep and disturbed dreams, and missing my family and missing the comfort of my home. And then suddenly being woken up by the clatter of tin cans that the sergeant would bash onto the radiators. Time to get up, on your feet, on your feet. Get yourself washed, dressed, shaved, and down to parade as soon as you can. And I remember picking up my washing gear and going down to the so-called washing stations, which were cold and no hot water because the heating had gone off, and having a wash and a shave and freezing cold water. And I thought, my goodness, it can't get any worse than this. It can't. It was a horrible, horrible introduction to the army. But when I said it can't get any worse than this, I was wrong, because it did. And we had 6 weeks in that fort, which I'll tell you more about. On the first morning parade, which I would call a parade, was an assembly really on the parade square, thinking that we were going to be taught to march, but of course we were ankle deep in snow again, being snowfall through the night. So our first job naturally was to be issued with shovels and spades to clear the square of the snow, which we had to do, and that took a couple of hours because, I say, the heavy fall. There was about 40 of us on this particular platoon area, and we shoveled and cast the snow to one side, thinking, of course, that would be the end of it. But no, you're in the army now. You don't cast the snow to one side. You pile it up in a very regular heap until it actually became a 6-foot wall, and a wall that I'd be dressed down and shaved with the shovels in order to have a nice trim surface. So we had a 6-foot wall of snow around the square, with apertures cut into it so you could access the building. It made me laugh, that one, but it was hard work, I can tell you. Everyone had to take a turn at this. Every time there was a snowfall, a platoon would be adopted in order to clear the square. But following that, of course, we were marched to the quartermaster's stores in order to be issued with our uniform and socks and boots. Now, the socks and boots were done very cleverly in the sense that everyone must put on 2 pairs of socks because your feet are going to hurt. You're going to march and there's going to be a swelling. So I want to make sure that you put 2 pairs of socks on and jam the boots on. And if they fit tightly with 2 pairs of socks, we hope that's the way they'll be, the right size. And of course it did work out for me that way. I was quite pleased that my boots eventually did fit. But as far as the uniform was concerned, I got a pair of trousers that fit, but the quartermaster was just slinging stuff across the counter. Take this, take that, there's your jacket. And I said, but that jacket is far too big for me. He said, well, just see if there's anybody you can swap with you. But the jacket he gave me was actually, I think, would fit an 18-stone man. And there was no one in the squad of that size at all. We were all tall and skinny. So I was left with this bloody jacket that wouldn't fit. The collar was down here like a horse collar, and the top of the blouse was folded over the belt. It was shocking, ever so big. And it wasn't until the officer came on parade later on and saw me in that one and said, what on earth is going on here? Take him back to the stores and get him refitted. So I ended up with a perfect fit, so that was perhaps a good thing to happen for me. Anyway, from there we were marched to the Assembly Hall in order to have a so-called lecture by one of the sergeants, introducing us to the procedures that we'd need to follow and the things we needed to know in order to settle in and be prepared for what was going to happen to us over the next 6 weeks. But following the lecture that we had, we then went to the MO, the medical officer's place, to be vaccinated and inoculated. And so that was rather painful because the inoculation weren't too bad, but the vaccination really hurt. And that was the beginning because we had more to come. But that was one of the things that they always ensure that when they first join the army, they want to try and make sure that if you're not already healthy, we hope that in the passage of time you will be. And then from there, of course, we were marched to the barbers. And of course, you know, with me, with my beautiful wavy hair, that was the end of it. Because everyone, no matter who or how or whatever, we had the shears put to our heads and we were almost totally cropped of our hair in order that, again, we all look the same, like convicts in a prison. But I suppose really behind all of this, a lot of people might have had headlights and things like that, so by getting rid of the hair, they were getting rid of the headlights as well, I suppose. So the first morning was quite a good introduction, following my cold wash and shave, and then the shoveling of the snow, and then the ill-fitting of a uniform and the inoculations and that. And of course, that meant that we were all in pain because the vaccinations were truly painful. And the effect of that was also painful. In fact, for the later on in the afternoon, we were excused duties because we were all considered to be what a medical officer would declare that we were medically unfit for the afternoon. So they gave us a couple of hours off in the afternoon to go back to our barracks and relax. And that was the first time we ever had any time to relax. Although the heavy snows did diminish after about 10 days to a fortnight, I can assure you that while it was snowing, it made no difference to the training at all. We had to do everything that was required of us, despite the bad weather, even to the point of jogging in the snow in order to so-called keep us fit, or say if we were fit, and route marches. We used to go outside of the fort into the countryside and march 5 or 6 miles each afternoon. Subsequently, people suffering with sore feet, etc., at the end of that until they got hardened. One of the things that I do recall, well, two things actually, is that they say that when you're in the army, you never volunteer for anything. And of course, I fell foul of that in the first week, because they always try the old tricks of coming into the room as they did for me on one afternoon. It was a Sunday afternoon when in fact we were hopefully having a rest and being free of parades. Anybody here a musician? And of course, because I was a trumpet player, I proudly stood up and said, yes sir, I'm a musician, I'm a trumpet player. Good, right. I want you to do a job for me. There's a Bren gun being delivered and it's all wrapped up in grease, etc. And you can clean that for me, ready for use tomorrow morning. And it dumped a great big crate in front of me with a Bren gun in parts, thick of grease, etc. So my Sunday afternoon, instead of being restful, meant that I had a bottle of paraffin and cloths to wipe all the grease off, and then learn to assemble the Bren gun ready for use. Not that I knew anything about it, but I could see where the parts went, etc. And that was the first thing I should have remembered. I fell foul of it twice, actually. But you never volunteer for anything in the army. Never volunteer.
Let that be a warning to the rest of you. Never volunteer for anything in the army, except certain death.
And the other thing, of course, is you never complain, because no one's going to take any notice. But in the first week, when you're a novice, and we're in the dining hall, and we were served, I think it was a Sunday lunch or whatever. It was a dinner time, I know, because it was vegetables and gravy and such like on the plate. And on my plate, in amongst the mince and gravy, was a dishcloth in the dinner, soaked in gravy in the dishcloth. And I was saying, look at my pals, look at my bloody dinner here, like that. So, or you want to complain about that when the officer comes round, because the officer comes round every meal time and say, any complaints? And nobody ever stands up. But because they dared me to stand up, and I thought, well, yes, I'm going to, because it's scandalous, that. So he came round and, any complaints, any complaints? And I stood up to attention. What's the problem, Private? What's the problem? I said, well, look at my dinner, sir. There's the dishcloth inside the potatoes and gravy. Oh, good God, he said, good God. And he turned to the sergeant cook and said, how do you explain that? And of course the sergeant cook looked at the dinner and said, oh, thank you very much, we've been looking for that all day. It's gone missing. And put your fingers in and dragged it out and put it to one side and walked off. And of course I thought that was it. That was it. Any complaints? No bloody use at all. But there you are. That was two things that we had. And of course you have to recall, because of the amount of troops in the barracks, because there was hundreds there, quite a large number all over, everyone coming in every fortnight, there was replacements. And you can appreciate that the need for food was paramount, and we were pretty remote. So there was always the daily chore of peeling spuds. And sometimes you had the job of spud peeling as a punishment, and other times it was just the fact that you were handy and you would join the group and have to peel the spuds.
6 men to scrub out the cookhouse. You, and you.
And what a job that was, because when I say peeling spuds, I'm not talking about a dish or two, I'm talking about a mountain of about 4 foot high on the ground, where the six or seven of you turn around and scrape and scrape and scrape. That was a task that I never ever liked. I hated spud peeling, hated it. But you know, one of the things that really troubled me and really was painful was that we had a lecture on about gas, killer gas, with the gas mask training that we had to have. And of course, at that time of the war, although gas was never used, there was always a fear that it could be used. So we had to learn about particularly two kinds of gases that was prevalent. There was the nerve gas, and you had to perhaps learn the smell of it in order to detect it and be aware of it. And the other one was mustard gas, which was semi-liquid, which would damage your skin and your body, and the fumes from it would kill you. In fact, both gases eventually would kill you. So the first training period we had on the gas was to don our gas masks, and I'm talking about a platoon where there's only about 16 to 20 of us, and we were marched inside this big, what we call the gas chamber, but it was an empty building sealed off inside, and there in the middle of the room with our gas masks on was a device which was emitting a smoky vapor from the top, and we knew that was the gas that was enveloping the room. So what they had to do was to give us the confidence of trusting our gas masks, and we were inclined or instructed to march around the perimeter of the room, quite large. So we marched and marched, and that while the fellow was shouting orders, and then he told us to jog. Well, I didn't realize at the time, the idea of jogging was to get you out of breath. Because after that, it was a question of masks off. And of course, if you had been walking, the tradition is that you could take your masks off and hold your breath. But when you've been jogging and you're breathless, you can't hold your breath. So when it was masks off, we could smell the vapor coming in, and we had to do 2 rounds of the thing, jogging with the gas mask off, and then masks back on again, and then we were allowed to come out of the gas chamber. And I can tell you, although the amount of gas that we inhaled in that little exercise wasn't at a level that would kill us, but it was certainly an effect on our nervous body, because we were twitching, we were losing control of our mouth. And I remember when I went in the canteen later to have a cup of tea, and the tea banged against your teeth, it felt as though your teeth were loose and wanted to drop out. It was pretty awful, I can tell you. And then, of course, while we were outside recovering from that, we then had the mustard gas treatment, where we didn't have masks on. It was a question of dealing with the splashes or the liquid of the mustard gas, where we had to roll our sleeves up, and you would come around with a little palette knife and pick a bit up just like butter, and then put it on the back of your hand or your wrist like that, and say, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it. And then there's the treatment, and there was like toothpaste tubes lying around, and you had to wipe it off and apply the toothpaste cream on the burn that you had in order to stop it from working. And I can tell you, it's frightening, because the mustard gas could penetrate your skin after some time. So we had to learn to deal with it very quickly in order to avoid any damage to our skin. Frightening, but part of the training. And of course, there's always some fantastic experiences when we go. I mean, we went on the rifle range, obviously on a daily period. And that was in order to learn how to use the rifle and to increase our marksmanship, etc. So not only did we have practice at shooting at targets, but we would take various opportunities of being in what we call the butts. Used to go around where the targets were and take a turn, because when you shot at the target, someone had to stop and hold up a great big wooden spoon affair, a big thing on the end, and you had to wave it like that and put it over the hole that he had just shot, so he could be told, because you were 300 yards away, see whether the shot he had was near the center, the bullseye of the target, or was it outside, and where was it, so you had to learn how to adjust his sights. And of course, as always, I'm a lucky bucket, because there was a ricochet on one occasion, and it spun off, it hit a rock behind the thing, and ricocheted across my backside, and actually tore my trousers, and put a crease in my the right buttock of my backside, and whoops, that hurt. So even though I was never shot by the enemy, I can say that I was shot by my own troops, friendly fire, shall we say, when I had a bullet in my backside. But the biggest, well, 2 items really were dangerous. We had a training with what we call the PIAT, which was a projectile anti-tank gun. It only had a range of about 100 yards, and the idea was it was to be able to fire bombs directly at the tank's tracks, etc., to see if you could just get them to stop the tank. You wouldn't penetrate the tank, but you could stop it from working. And you had the idea of the gun, as well call it, and put the bomb into the front end of it and aim, etc. And of course, it didn't affect me directly, but there's always an idiot in your platoon. There's always one lad who would do everything wrong, and we had one. And of course, when we had the Piat gun and it was his turn to do it, you're lying on the ground, naturally, although it looks, in your posture that you fire it like a rifle. But I say it was skim the ground directly for 100 yards. But he had it for some reason, and he had it so that it was sort of pointing down over. And when he fired the rocket, it only went about 50 yards and exploded in the ground there, which was quite fearful, I can tell you, because it was a bomb and it could have done a lot of damage, but we've always got an idiot like that. So it taught me that when he used to go on the drill, to avoid the crew that he was in, he was a real cracker. And there was another situation which I think was extremely frightening, extremely, because it was a near-death situation when we were learning to be taught how to throw hand grenades. Now, hand grenades are very, very lethal indeed, very lethal. And the drill about the hand grenade, I'll have to stand up perhaps and do it, but he had the hand grenade in his hand, and we're within what we call a pit, which had a wall of about 5 foot around, sandbags, etc. And we were looking over the top, and down at the bottom was an old battered car, which was supposed to be an enemy tank. And we had to throw the hand grenades down to see how far we could throw and how near we could get to the target. And of course this lad had the hand grenade in his hand, and of course the hand grenade's got two devices. It's got a spring clip that you hold with your fingers and a pin. Now the pin is holding it, the spring clip in, so it won't go off. But when you get ready to throw, you have it on your chest like this, and you learn to prepare to throw, and as you did that, you pull the pin out and hold your hands open. He dropped the bloody hand grenade inside the pit that we were in, and there were 6 of us in the pit. So the hand grenades now, it's only got 12 seconds to explode and kill everybody. And of course, like bloody rabbits, we were jumping over the wall, climbing up and frantically getting to the other side to get away from the bomb to go off. In the meantime, the officer that was in charge thought he was doing the right thing. He picked the hand grenade up after it and threw it over the top. And so we had to climb back into the pit, and all this happened in a speed of about 12 seconds, and to avoid us being blown up off the face of the earth. So we had a few laughs in our training period, things that I'll never forget, but it did add to the joy and merriment of the situation. It might seem from some of the tales that I've been talking about of my time at Fort George was that I had a happy time while I was there. And I didn't. I hated every minute of every day that I spent at Fort George. Everything. And I was looking forward to what I call the Great Escape at the end of 6 weeks, when I would be posted to a serving regiment outside of Fort George. But of course, that raised another fear for me, because it was traditional at that time that when you were posted to a regiment, you were inevitably posted to what they call your county regiment. And my county regiment was the Durham Light Infantry. The Durham Light Infantry. I'd had enough of infantry training for the past 6 weeks. I didn't want to be an infantryman. I wanted something better than that. And they said, well, there was a let-out clause that if you had family connection to a particular regiment, they would attempt to see if that was possible to assign you to that regiment. And I said, well, both my father and my brother Well, as you know, I didn't have a brother. I had a brother-in-law, but I pretended he was my brother. Both my father and my brother were members of the Royal Artillery during the early years of the war. And I would love to be able to carry on what I call the family tradition of being in the artillery. And they said, oh, that was very good indeed. And they would look favourably upon it and let me know in due course what my possibilities were. And a few days later, which was actually the end of the 5-week period, they informed me that I had in fact gained a posting to the Royal Artillery. Oh, what a relief that was. What joy it was for me. I was actually a happy man, and now I could look forward to better times ahead.